Okay, everybody, welcome to another random walk down Mill Street. It's 8:09, so I apologize for the slight delay. Today's topic is remembering Ḥarbonah, which is a topic that I think I've talked about in other times in to greater or lesser degree. And when you start scratching the surface of this topic, it gets very large. So I'm going to try to just talk about. I'm going to try to keep on point, but I have a lot of things I want to tell you. So we'll see how it goes. But the starting off point, and I'll share my screen at this point here, is here we go. Okay. Starting off point is the responses that we say during the Megillah. If you come to Sheretz Israel, come to any synagogue pretty much, there are certain places in the Megillah where the Chazan, the Koreh, who is reading the Megillah, stops and the congregation recites something. It's not the same in every community. Some communities recite 5 verses, some communities recite 4, some communities repeat a verse at the very end, some don't. But I'm going to tell you what the custom is here in Sheretz Israel. And it's pretty common amongst most Sephardim. And so if you go to most Sephardic synagogues, while they won't use the same melody we're doing, they should have the congregation recite these 4 or 5 verses. And if you go to Ashkenazic synagogues, they'll recite 4 of these 5 verses. The congregation will interrupt the flow of the Kriyah to recite these verses. And because part of my presentation is liturgical, we're going to listen to them. The first one is, and you see here the chapter and verse, all from Megillat Esther, and the text and the translation. And we're going to listen to the way they're sung here in Sheretz Israel. Now, in Sheretz Israel, the whole chant of the Megillah, it's a chant, and it doesn't follow the trope for the most part. ויהי בימי אחשוורוש הוא אחשוורוש המולך מהודו ועד כוש שבנג ועשר ימי המדינה da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. It's just a little chant, and every verse ends da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. It has a sof pasuk, and it's just a little chant. It goes like that. Sometimes you have a little more emphasis, sometimes a little more dramatic reading, but it does not follow the trope. These responsive verses are not sung to the same chant as the rest of the Megillah in our tradition. They are sung to something that is closer to a trope. Not perfectly relating to a trope, but it probably reflects that there was once a trope used in the Portuguese communities for, or the Sephardic communities for Esther, which is now lost and is only a remnant of it in these responsive verses. So one of the ways you'll see that is the pasek. You'll see like a couple places where like this word here, yatsa or ki, that's trope. It's not part of the chant. So pay attention for that. And here we go. I see there's somebody in the chat. Let's see what that is. Why doesn't it follow the trope? That is a harder question. And yes, I mean ta'amim. Perhaps it was lost. Perhaps I don't know. Don't know. Don't have a good answer. We're not the only congregation, only community that doesn't follow trope. Well, I saw Italian communities often, and some of the Teimanim communities sort of just have a straight chant. But yeah, Ashkenazim have a, should I say, better trope than we do? I don't know. Certainly more traditional trope reading than we do. Kriyat the Tamim. But let's listen to the way the verses are responded to. So this is the first one.
איש יהודי היה בשושן הבירה ושמו מרדכי בן יאיר בן שמעי בן קיש איש ימיני.
And in case you're wondering, that's Dr. David de Solapool, the former minister of Congregation Shearith Israel, who died in 1970. So it's a pretty old recording. And that's the first of the verses that are read by the community. I'm going to try to go through this fast because I want to get through more material, but I will look at the chats in a little bit when we get through all these verses. So that comes in the beginning of the story. Then we have one of the more important verses in terms of the turnabout or setting up the miracles to come, and that is the dream when Achashverosh is told about Mordechai's heroic reporting.
ויאמר להביא את ספר הזיכרונות דברי הימים ויהיו נקראים לפני המלך.
And in case you're wondering, that's Rabbi Ira Road, the current Chazan of Shearith Israel. Yeah, I mixed it up so you wouldn't get bored with the recordings. And here's the third verse, where I should say, the next verse that we read communally here in Shearith Israel. And these two go together. This is just a mistake that I didn't bold it, but read one after the other, the Chazan repeating the verse in between each one.
ומרדכי יצא מלפני המלך מלבוש מלכות תכלת בחור ותרץ הגדולה ותכריך בוץ וירגמן והעיר שושן צהלה ושמחה.
Again, Dr. Poole, that goes right into the next verse.
הייתה אורה ושמחה וששון ויקר.
That is Bram Cardozo, our late Chazan. And then finally, the very last verse of the Megillah is also prompted by the congregation and then repeated by the Chazan.
מרדכי היהודי משנה למלך אחשוורוש וגדול ליהודים ורצוי לרוב אחיו דורש טוב לנעמו ודובר שלום לכל זרעו.
That's the end of the Megillah. That was pretty fast, by the way. We did the whole thing pretty quickly. And then the congregation repeats right when that is done, the Chol and the congregation jumps in and says, La Yehudim hayeta ora v'simcha v'sason v'ikar, repeating that verse about the happiness of the Jews to the events that happened in the story of Purim. And during that time, while that congregation is chanting that, the Chazan is furiously folding up or rolling up the Megillah so he can recite the final blessing, which I have reproduced for you on the next page. Let's take a look at the chat before we go to there. Can we reconstruct the lost tamim from the pieces we know? Maybe a little bit. No one has really tried. It's really just a remnant of something. I don't know if anyone has actually written it out in terms of trope, but when you say we, Claude, I see you mean the Syrian community, I assume? Yeah. Some communities do have a trope. Certainly the Ashkenazim, but some Sephardic communities do as well. Okay. Let's see. So we finished the Megillah. We repeat this verse. The congregation repeats this verse. And then the Chazan, or the Koreh, I should say, says... figure out how to stop this. Surplus. Okay. Why doesn't it? I was worried about, but okay, here we go. Sorry about that, everybody. And here we have the brachot, which are just sort of read kind of straight. There's no special melody until you get to the end. Ha'el HaMoshiach, which is sort of a standard way we say blessings in Sheretz Israel. But it's an interesting bracha that we only say, here on Purim. It's an interesting blessing, which is not. Maybe I'll save that for next year. We'll talk about this blessing. But the next part is not part of the blessing. Right after the blessing is over, we have this little back and forth where the Chazan says Arur Haman, and the congregation replies Baruch Mordechai Arura Zeresh Berucha Esther Arurim Harishanim Beruchim Kol Yisrael Vegam Ḥarbonah Zachor Letov. And Chazan says that either together with or repeats Zachor Letov, and then our beat continues. Now, this is what I want to talk about. This is an interesting little, I don't know, there's probably a good word for it, but back and forth with the Koreh and the Kahal. And it sort of makes sense. You have these opposites. You have Haman, cursed be Haman. The translation of Dr. Poole is, I love Dr. Poole's translation often. This is not one of them. The memory of Haman is abhorred. No, it says cursed is Haman. Okay, Arur Haman. Baruch Mordechai, blessed is Mordechai. And I guess he's worried about it because it seems to be in the present tense, so he wants to make sure that you know that it's in the past. Arura Zeresh. Cursed is Zeresh, the wife of Haman, who has almost no role in the whole Megillah, barely anything, but yeah, she gets cursed. Berucha Esther, the heroine. Arurim Harishaim, the evildoers should get cursed, and Beruchim Kol Yisrael, the people of Israel should be blessed. Then we have this last line, Vegam Ḥarbonah, and also this person named Ḥarbonah, Zachor Letov, he should be remembered for good. So who is Ḥarbonah, and why should he be remembered for good is kind of the topic of what I'm talking about, what I want to talk about, but only part of it. So Ḥarbonah appears in the Megillah. Ḥarbonah appears in the Megillah 2 times. I think I have it on the next page. Let's see. Did I? Yeah, okay. Ḥarbonah appears in the Megillah 2 times. The first time is in the list of the Sarisim, the eunuchs, is usually how that's translated, or the servants of the king, where they list 7 names. One of them is Ḥarbonah, and they're sent to bring, or Ḥarbonah is sent to bring Vashti from her party to the king for display, setting up the whole story to come. Just note that when it's written Ḥarbonah in that first chapter, it's written with an aleph. Ḥarbonah with an aleph. You don't hear about Ḥarbonah again until the end of the story, at the second banquet that Esther throws for Haman and Achashverosh, and after she pleads for her life, the king is all drunk and he gets up, and Haman falls on Esther's couch, on her bed, or whatever. Achashverosh comes in, sees this, and says, "What are you, even my own house, you're accosting my wife?" And Haman's face dropped, or some people say they put a cover over his face. Some people say they arrested him, or he was embarrassed so much that his head drooped, whatever that, chafu. And then we have this verse, chapter 7, verse 9. Vayomer Ḥarbonah echad min hasarisim lifnei hamelech gam hinei ha'etz asher asa Haman leMordechai asher diber tov al hamelech omed bebeit Haman gavoa 50 amah vayomer hamelech tiluhu alav. So Ḥarbonah is his only role in the whole Megillah is to inform the king that not only has Haman been behaving badly this evening in the house at the Mishteh of Esther, but also Gam, he's the guy who put up a gallows for Mordechai. And I think one of the most important parts of this verse is Asher diber tov al hamelech. Ḥarbonah reminds the king that the person that the king, the person who spoke well for the king, who saved the king's life earlier, whose name was Mordechai, Haman wants to kill that guy. Haman is your enemy, Achashverosh, he reminds him, and he has a gallows, so very convenient, which then he is then hung upon, and the story goes on. So he is reminding Achashverosh of the value of Mordechai and pointing out another misdeed, shall we say, of Haman, which enables the king to hang him. And so that's a pretty important turning point, or another turning point in the story. Haman is already, his goose is cooked, but there are some people who like to point out that this word gam, Rashi and many Mefarshim, why does Ḥarbonah say gam hinei ha'etz, which is also Haman has a gallows up for Mordechai. Why doesn't it say hine? Why doesn't it say hine? Asa Haman ha'etz gavoa chamishim. He has. Why does it gam also? Because he's pointing out another misdeed of Haman, which enables him to be killed. It's not enough that Haman wanted to kill the Jews, because you know what? That was already royally sanctioned with the ring of the king. They chose those dates. The king probably knew about it, or even if there's nothing he could do about that. So how's he going to get him? He spoke bad about one of my supporters. He wants to kill one of my supporters. Now I can kill him. There's some Mefarshim who make it that Achashverosh could not have done what he did without this extra support that Ḥarbonah gave. So that's what we're trying to remember. Now I want to go back a second. There is a midrash. It's in the Gemara. It's elsewhere. Pretty famous that Ḥarbonah, when this second Ḥarbonah anyway, was actually Eliyahu in disguise. That Elijah the prophet appeared before the king as Ḥarbonah, and he's the one who set this turnabout of Haman in motion. And some people take that literally. The whole book, is hard to say, but some people take that interpretation literally. That according to the Midrash, Ḥarbonah, Eliyahu was, what appeared as Ḥarbonah, but not Ibn Ezra. And I like the way Ibn Ezra has his interpretation, so I included it here for you. It says, "Lefi dati sha'atam shezeh hasaris hu hanizkar b'tchilat hasefer ki hu meha shiv'a hasarisim." So no, it's not that Ḥarbonah was Eliyahu. Ḥarbonah is one of the eunuchs here. We saw him earlier. He's actually a eunuch in the king's court, and he did something good for Israel. Asa tova Yisrael, uba'a Yeshua al yado, and the redemption of the people came about because of him, because of these acts of Ḥarbonah, because he stood there and told the king about Haman's misdeeds and suggested that he has a gallows. That is what brings about the redemption of the Jews. Ki'ilu, as if Eliyahu zichrono levracha haya shehu hamevaser bevo hayeshua. Just like we believe that Elijah, the prophet, will come to hearken the ultimate redemption of our people. He will bring the good tidings, besarot tovot, to the people of Israel in advance of the redemption of the people. This was an act like that. Ḥarbonah came, and he, and because of him, the people were redeemed, just like Elijah. So we say, just like we say to Elijah, Zachor Latov, which is a whole topic which I won't get into tonight, so too we should say Zachor Latov for Ḥarbonah. So says Ibn Ezra. So that's one of the reasons that we say V'gam Ḥarbonah Zachor Latov, because Ḥarbonah is likened to Elijah, who is always remembered for good, for being the bringer of good news, bringing the hearkening of salvation. Let's see what we have here. Yeah, okay. Oops, no, not there yet. So now I want to take you back to 1841. I think I've read this for you before, so for some of you this will be a review. And this is not something that I discovered. There is a great blog on the internet. By now it's quite experienced. It's been around for quite a number of years, called the On the Main Line. And there's always great stuff that he digs out. And this was from a number of years ago about Purim in New York in 1841. And here are two little newspaper snippets from March 3rd, which would be before Purim, and March 9th, which is right after Purim, reporting on Purim to the readers of the New York Herald Tribune. And we'll just read it quickly. Okay. March 3rd. On Saturday evening and on Sunday next, all pious Jews and Jewesses attend the synagogue, on which occasion the book of Esther, Megillat Esther, it will be chanted by Brother Jacques Lyons and perhaps by Brother Ellis Lyons, both very competent chazanim, readers, and very frum withal. On Sunday, most of the Jews will receive calls similar to those made on Rosh Hashanah. Tables will be set out, furnished with the choicest viands and liquors. Presents of various kinds will be given to the poor, whose hearts will on this day at least be made to rejoice. A piece of advice, and we close: let there be no hammers or mallets used in the Crosby Street Synagogue Shul when the name of Haman is mentioned. But in its proper place, let everyone exclaim at the top of his voice, Zachor Latob. We wish one and all a happy, happy Purim. Then, after Purim, the same author reports what happened. March 9th. This feast in commemoration of the salvation of the Jews by the lovely Queen Esther, was very merrily and delightfully kept. We were deprived of visiting the shul on account of the tremendous storm, and very sorry are we that we could not listen to the sweet chanting of the Megillah by Reverend Jacques Lyons. We understand that there were only about 45 who attended. On Sunday, however, it was somewhat pleasant, which afforded an excellent opportunity to hear the Megillah and to pay Purim calls. By the way, just as a complete aside, if you have to choose one Megillah to go to, you want to go, if you can't go to both, go to the one during the day. That's the more important one. That's the mitzvah of the day. The one at night is sort of an add-on. People usually think the other way around. Somehow the night one gets many more people to attend, probably because it's after work instead of before work. But the daytime Megillah is the one that's more connected to the mitzvot of the day. Anyway, so he can't go at night, he goes during the day. The Spanish Jews behaved well throughout the day and the evening, but some of our Tisha friends, which I think he means Deutsche friends, Ashkenazic friends, ate and drank too much. They must learn to deny themselves both in the Sukkah and on Purim day, and indeed on all other days. They must not make their gob their belly. We are happy to learn that no noise was made when the name of Haman was read, and that with one shout of triumph, every Hebrew cried out Zachor Latov after the word Ḥarbonah, following the good advice of the herald. So this is exactly what we do today, or pretty much. We do not permit groggers in our synagogue. That could be a whole nother talk another time about the history of noise-making on for Haman. But we do not permit groggers in the synagogue. Sometimes people will pound their feet onto the ground, making a low rumbling sound when they hear the name of Haman, but it's much more subdued than almost any other synagogue you'll ever go to. Maybe, it's really quite quiet, except you get to the word Ḥarbonah in the Megillah, and people shout out Zachor Latov. Not just after the blessings when it says V'gam Ḥarbonah Zachor Latov, but in the middle of the Megillah, in the middle of reading the Megillah, when you get to that verse that we read earlier, people shout out Zachor Latov. And in fact, I have a recording, not a live recording, but from Amsterdam, made by Chazan Nabarro, where he includes in his recording an instruction. Here the congregation says Zachor Latov. So we'll listen to that. And it starts the verse before verse 9 here.
gemeente, Zakur Leto. Echal min hatarisim lifnei hamelech, gam inyan yisrakin atam al Mordechai, asher diber tov al hamelech nomet bebeit Haman.
Goes on. But inserted right in the middle of the pasuk is the words Zachor Latov as a sort of an exclamation in response to hearing Ḥarbonah. We don't permit Groggers, but we do permit Ashkenazi. Both of those comments are absolutely correct. So this is the custom that I want to explore a little bit in the time we have remaining. The custom of shouting out Zachor Latov in the middle of the verse during the Megillah. Okay. It doesn't want to. Okay, did I get this right? Okay, we're gonna have to skip around a little bit. So I want to just talk about for a second the verses that people say. There are different formulations: 2 verses, 4 verses. We say 5 verses that are shouted out by the congregation in the middle of the Megillah, and then repeated by the Chazan. So Abu Darham, who is a Spanish halachist, minhag recorder from, I think, the 13th century, maybe the 14th century is probably more accurate, 14th century, 1300s, in Spain. So he records this custom. The first recording is actually, I think, in Sadia Gaon, but this one gives you an explanation of why. So, Katav ibn Yarchi, who's a Provençal rabbi, Nahagu b'Tzorfat u'b'Provence lomar shliach tzibor hatchalat arba'at elu hapsukim b'Megillah v'hatzibor mashlimin otam. It is this Provençal rabbi writes, and is being quoted here in Abu Darham, that in the custom in Provence and in France is that the reader, the shliach tzibor, begins these 4 verses, and the congregation completes them, b'kol ram, aloud. V'achar kach chozer shliach tzibor otam, and then the Chazan repeats the verses in their entirety. And what are they? Ish Yehudi haya b'Shushan habira, u'Mordechai Yoshe, which is just a mistake. It should say Mordechai Yatza. Mordechai Yatza milifnei hamelech, when he gets paraded around. La Yehudim hayeta ora v'simcha v'sason v'ikar. And then the last verse, Ki Mordechai, the last verse of the whole Megillah. Those are the 4 verses listed there in Abu Darham. And why are we doing that? I don't think anyone really realized this until I read it. I certainly didn't realize it until recently. Why are we reading this? V'chol zeh leharbot hasimcha layeladim. We're doing this to increase the happiness, the joy of the children. It's not for any special, deep connection to the meaning of the verses. That is what Ibn Yarchi says, anyway. It's for the children, and for everyone. V'chein katav Bal Mishmeret HaMoadot. It's another book I don't know from the medieval period. Upiresh ki hatam hu kedei leorer halev im yitnamnaim echad mehem shelo yaradam. I don't know if it's plural or singular, but he says a different reason. He says not because we want the kids to be happy and it's fun. He says it's to wake people up. In case you start nodding off, we got something important going on. Megillah, we're reading Megillah. So every once in a while in the whole book, we shout out these verses, and people are, it's more fun this way. It's more exciting. They're not going to fall asleep of boredom listening to some boring chazan without any trope droning on. V'omrim elu hapsukim mipnei shehem ketuvim. Why these verses of all of them? Shehem ketuvim gabe Mordechai. They're talk about Mordechai. Mishum kvodo, because of his, to honor him. She'inyan hanes haya al yado, because the miracle happened because of him. Because of Mordechai is encouraging Esther. You get a lot of people that miracles could have happened because of, but Mordechai is identified here as the prime mover, and we say verses about him to make it interesting for people, make it fun for the kids, make it interesting for people, that they shouldn't be bored and falling asleep during the Megillah. And also, why we're reading the last verse? Because you don't have to wake up. It's the end. What are you waking up for? You also need to wake up for the last verse. Why? Because you need to have intention for the last. It should be connected, and you should have intention to connect the end of the Megillah to the blessing that follows. I will not go into it very deeply, but this is a very big topic. What is that last blessing that we mentioned earlier? Is it connected to the Megillah, or is it a separate blessing? Umishum kvodo shel Mordechai. So says Abu Darham, so he quoting another book. And then he adds at the very end, Rabbeinu Sadia, who is the Gaon in Babylonia, Lo hizkir el shnei pesukim bilvad. He only has 2 verses which are read like this: La Yehudim hayta ora v'simcha, and Ki Mordechai HaYehudi. Those are the last 2 really of this list of 4. And then very interestingly, Abu Jarham ends V'chein nohagin berov hamekomot besarad. So too is the custom here in Spain. Only 2 verses. We read 5 today, but in Spain, in the time of Abu Jarham, or at least where he was, the custom was to read 2 verses like Sadia Gaon. Not all of these. Okay. I don't know how many of you knew that before, but the reason we recite these verses is not some deep, meaningful thing. It's to make it fun and to keep people awake. That's why we read those verses. Now I want you to read the next thing in Machzor Vitri, which is a similar thing, but he has sort of like a little bit of a polemic. Ish Yehudi v'chulei. This is from Machzor Vitri, so this is attributed to the students of Rashi. It's Ashkenazic, northern France. Also medieval period, probably 1200, 1300 or so. V'chein Mordechai, maybe a little earlier actually, maybe 1100, 1200. V'chein Mordechai yatzal Yehudim, ki Mordechai Yehudi. These are the verses that he's saying that people shout out. Shenahagu ha'am la'omra b'peh. They say it out loud. B'sha'at kriyat Megillah. Eino chova. There's no requirement to do this. People do it, but there's no reason to do it. No, not required. Ve'eno minhag, and it's not a custom. There's no custom to do this. This is not a custom. Ela simchat tinokot. That it's for the happiness of the children. That's why we're doing it. There's no chova, no halacha to do it, no minhag to do it. It's just for fun. But then he compares it to another place where the congregation shouts out. Aval mikra shel yud gimel midot shenahagu ha'am la'omro b'shat kriyat sefer Torah, which we do, by the way, on most years on the eve of Purim, where we read Vayechal at Mincha about the fast, the public reading for a fast day, which includes the 13 attributes of mercy, the divine attributes of mercy. The custom is that the congregation says that verse. El erech hapayim, chesed, Poked avon avon. What I can't think of it right now, but it'll come to me tomorrow. That the custom is to say out loud by the congregation, and that he likes. He says minhag kasherhu. That's a very important minhag. That's a good minhag. It's a nice minhag to do on a Tani Torah. Unlike what he doesn't say explicitly, but he clearly is denigrating. It's not a chovah. It's not a minhag. It's just for fun of the kids. The Rashi or the students of Rashi don't really like this custom. Nevertheless, we do it pretty strongly to this day. Now, as long as we're in the story, not us. Okay, what does that mean? What does that mean, Claude? What's not us? You have to tell us what you mean. I'll come back to it later. So there is another the next section in the Machzor Vitri, I'm only giving you excerpts, is something that I thought was quite interesting. Here, Machzor Vitri says that these are halachot that come out of the Mishnah, the Gemara, the Tosefta. So in Ashkenaz they didn't have the same kind of code development that happened in Sfarad, and later on it gets to the Shulchan Aruch and the Tur and everything. In Ashkenaz you sort of have these compilations which have minhagim and customs and laws. So here he says, Matzati b'tshuvot ha'gaonim. I saw in a responsa of the gaonim. Shliach tzibur hakorei et Megillah b'tzibur tzarich lesidra ke'achat. The person reading the Megillah for the congregation has to read it in one order. This is coming out of the Mishnah, coming out of the Gemara. Mipnei shehi ke'igeret achat. Because that's the way a letter or a royal decree or a missive, a formal letter is read. It's read all at once. You don't read it one part one day, another part another day. You don't break it up into pieces. It's announced all at once. You can imagine the royal crier, da 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 da, hear ye, right? It's not going to do hear ye, and then take a break and then come back an hour later and do the rest of it. But all in one breath, you don't have to do it in one breath. Okay, understandable. But for the 10 children of Haman, then you do have to do it in one breath. That's the custom. That's what the halacha is. Hilkach im mafsik bein pasuk lepasuk ein bekach klum. If you make an interruption between different verses, it's okay. The im pasak beemtza pasuk mishum nishima, and if you break in the middle of a verse to breathe, to take a breath, ein bekach klum. And then he tells you what is the shiur, what is the minimum amount that we're talking about between a verse to verse or within the verse. Nishima bilvad, one breath. Okay, so he tells you kind of two opposite things in the same section. One is he's supposed to read it all at once, but if he makes a pause to breathe, it's okay. Even if he does it in the middle of the verse, it's okay. But how much can he take a break? Only one breath. So it's really saying you need to read the whole thing all at once, but you don't have to be crazy about it. You can breathe. You can take a breath. You can take breaks between the verses. We're going to see other opinions later. And now look at the next thing. And this is a paraphrase of the Mishnah and the Tosefta and the Gemara. Mehechan korei adam et Megillah. From where do you have to read the Megillah? Which is an interesting premise immediately. From where the Megillah is long, what do you have to read in order to fulfill your obligation to hear Megillah on Purim? Rabbi Meir says, Kula, you got to read the whole thing from beginning to end. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Mi'ish Yehudi. That verse sounds familiar, right? Mi'ish Yehudi. Rabbi Yossi Omer, Me'achar hadivarim ha'ele. V'amar Rabbi Chalbo, Amar Rabbi Chama, Amar Rav, halacha kedivrei ha'omer kula, like Rabbi Meir says. That's the standard halacha. You have to read the whole thing. But there are different opinions about where you have to start. And one of those opinions is you need to start from Ish Yehudi. And even according to the opinion that says that you can do from Ish Yehudi, this is what he closes with. You have to read from a Megillah that has everything, and you have to go from you can start in the middle and go to the end, but you still have to have the whole Megillah in front of you. Okay, that is the Machzor Vitri. There is something there I want to point out. I don't want to spend a lot of time on it, or two things there. One is that clearly he doesn't want you making any interruptions. He wants you to read the whole thing with only very minor interruptions. And some of the verses we saw earlier seem to take on some prominence here among very old opinions about where you have to start from. Now, these are the source texts where it's coming from, and there's two of them: the Mishnah and the Tosefta. I'm just going to read for time. I'm going to read the Tosefta. This is from the second chapter of Megillah. Mitzvat Megillah mitchilata v'ad sofa. Divrei Rabbi Meir. The requirement, the mitzvah of reading the Megillah is from its beginning to its end. The whole thing. So says Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Me'ish Yehudi. That's the verse that we know, what we sing. It says that's where you have to start from. Rabbi Yossi Omer, Me Achar Hadivarim Ha'ela. It's not a verse that we sing, but it's an important verse. That's the beginning of chapter 3. Now, here's a third opinion. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar Omer, Mi Balayla Hahu. From that's another verse that we say, Laila ha'u nadada shenat hamelech, on that evening when the king couldn't sleep. Aval hakol nodim, everybody says, shemitzvatal digmor asof. So no matter what opinion says where you have to start, whether it's the very beginning, or you can start in the middle, the second verse, the second chapter, the third chapter, all of them say that you have to continue from there to the end. Okay. I find it quite interesting, and nobody really talks about it, that two of the verses that we read out loud are of opinions here that say that that's where you have to start the Megillah. And my working assumption is that this is the basis of that opinion that that was brought down in Abu Draham, that let's say someone was dozing off or getting bored. We get to an important part of the Megillah from which you can begin again and be yotze your obligation. And so we say it out loud. Pay attention now. Maybe you messed up already, but you can continue and finish your obligation. I think that at least some same ideas are getting involved there. Okay. Now we're going to sort of bring it home. I'm going to try to get everything done in the next 10 minutes. We'll see. I might have to skip a few of these, but what is the actual halacha? So there's two things that I want to go towards. I want to press upon you. One is this is a Ḥarbonah Zachor L'Tov part. That's the topic of our main topic of our discussion. The other thing is about interruptions. So according to Shulchan Aruch, Tarich Sheyomar Arur Haman Baruch Mordechai Arura Zeresh Barucha Esther. This is what we say. Slightly different. Arurim Kol Ovdei Elilim. The idol worshippers should be cursed, as opposed to Rishaim, the evildoers. And then the Tzarich Sheyomar, you're required to say V'gam Ḥarbonah Zachor L'Tov. So it's a requirement. He's saying this is like a mitzvah of the night. Interesting because it's sort of a liturgical thing. And then also he says in the Shulchan Aruch a little bit later, Ein lasoach ba'od shekorinota. You're not supposed to speak in the middle of the Megillah. Now that gets tempered a little bit, as you'll see in the next source, which actually appears earlier, that it is okay to read the Megillah sirugin. It comes from the Mishnah. Exactly what sirugin means is we don't have to get into today, but it's interpreted to mean in pieces. So you could read the first chapter, take a little break, and then read the second chapter, take a little break, and so forth. It is permitted to do so according to all directly out of the Mishnah. So when it says that you can't talk in the middle, what does that mean? So that's a little bit of an issue that sort of these sources don't go together. But according to many, people are very careful not to speak in the middle of the Megillah. And so this is the Mishnah Berurah, who I don't often quote, but I just want to show you how serious people take it. Hakol b'neshima achat. This is talking about later about reading the whole Megillah, where you don't actually have to read it all in one breath. But he says, B'chol Megillah bein pasuk lepasuk yafsik rak kedei neshima. We saw that earlier in the Master Vitri, right? But in the whole Megillah, the whole reading, you can make a interruption only to breathe a little bit, a short breath amount. That's what you can do. Because you have to read it like it's a letter, a royal decree letter. You're going to read it all at once. You're not going to read it in pieces. Unlike what it just said about sirugin. But okay. When it gets to this special verse, the Chazan should raise his voice because this is where the miracles begin. What's evident from the Mishnah Berurah is that the people are not saying Balayla Hahu, which is a current Ashkenazic practice. That's only Sephardim say this verse, Balayla Hahu, out loud. But of the Ashkenazim, Mishnah Berurah is an Ashkenazic rabbi. So he says it's important. He wants the Chazan to say it out loud, and make a point of saying it out loud, but not to interrupt it with the congregation saying it. Okay. So what about what we do? So where is this coming from? So first of all, where is the requirement that the Shulchan Aruch you saw here? Tzarich sheyomar arur haman, tzarich sheyomar v'gam Ḥarbonah Zachor L'Tov. It is required to say these things. Where does that come from? So that is a Yerushalmi. It's a Talmud in the Talmud of the land of Palestine. So it's a pretty old source, not exactly Mishnaic era, but it's pretty old. And here's the quote. It's from the 3rd chapter of Megillah. Rav Amar Tzarich Lomar Arur Haman Arurim Banav. It says that you are required to say this. It doesn't say the context of where or when. Amar Rav Pinchas Tzarich Lomar Ḥarbonah Zachor L'Tov. You have to say Ḥarbonah, should be remembered for good. And the interpretation here, and I don't do Yerushalmi very frequently, so I don't actually even know who this is commentary, but the equivalent of Rashi here says La'achar kriyat Megillah shenizkar ba Haman ubanav sarich lomar arur Haman. So he interpreted immediately to say after the Megillah is over, when you've completed the Megillah, then you should say this stuff, which is what we do. We have it it's liturgically put right into our Siddur. It's a little bit different in the Ashkenazim. They have Shoshanat Yaakov, but it's also a liturgical little poem where you have these Arur Haman, Arur Zeresh, etc., and Baruch Mordechai, Berucha Esther, etc., and Gam Ḥarbonah Zachor L'Tov. That is after the Megillah, according to the simple pshat or the main interpretation of the Talmud Yerushalmi. But the Talmud Yerushalmi didn't make this up. It didn't start there. It actually comes from Midrashim, which are earlier. And actually it appears in several Midrashim. I am quoting to you here one that is in Midrash Bereshit Rabbah. Also occurs in Esther Rabbah and in other Midrashim. I don't know which ones are the oldest. Bereshit Rabbah I think is not so old, but it's the one I have quoted for you here. Okay. And here's what we're gonna sort of close and finish up with. It says Zecher Tzadik Livracha V'Shem Rishaim Yirkav. That is a verse in Proverbs in Mishlei. You have to remember the righteous for a blessing, and the name of the evildoer should be broken. Amar Ribi Yitzchak. Kol mi shehu maskir et hatzadik. Anyone who mentions a righteous person, the eno mevaracho over ba'aseh. Person who mentions a righteous person but doesn't say it, doesn't bless him. Eno mevaracho. He has violated a positive commandment. Why has he violated a positive commandment? Because of what it says in Mishlei, Zecher Tzadik Livracha. By the way, that's why we put that after people's names. Oh, Reb so-and-so Zatzal, Zal, Zecher Livracha, Zechrona Livracha, Zecher Tzadik Livracha. Why are we saying that? Well, there's actually some kind of midrashic source which says that it seems to indicate it's a chovah. It's required if you're going to mention a righteous person to say that their memory is for a blessing. What it means, not for this tonight, but that's why we do that. V'chol mishu maskir tarasha, and if you mention an evildoer, the eno mikalo, and you don't curse him, over ba'aseh, you have violated a positive commandment. How so? Ma tameha v'shem rishaim yirkav. The same verse in the second part of the verse in Mishlei. Amar Rabbi Shmuel. We'll go skip a little bit just for verses for time. Goes on. There's some examples of who you need to say it for, and then it says the following: Rabbi Berachya, Rabbi Chelbo, Mishum Rabbi Shmuel Bar Nachman, Rabbi Yonatan. So we have a chain of rabbis who say the following: Keshahaya magia lepasuk hazeh asher hogla miyushalayim im hagola. When it talks about Yechonia and Nebuchadnezzar bringing the king in from Judah into Babylonia in the beginning of the Megillat Esther, which Ashkenazic practice, by the way, is to read in the trope of Eicha in a mournful tune. Not our custom, but still very interesting. When they got to that point in the Megillah, Hava Amar Nebuchadnezzar Shechik Atzamot, they would say that his bone should break. The Lama Lo Have Amar Kain B'Yirmiyah. Why is it saying that they do this when it says it in Nebuchadnezzar is mentioned in the Megillah and not when they're reading a Haftarah in Jeremiah or something like that? So call Nebuchadnezzar Shekatu B'Yirmiyah Chai Have, because when you're reading that, he's still alive. I don't know why that makes a difference. So it says. We can say that for another time. But keep going. Now we keep going. Rav ki hava matei lehaman bepurim. When Rav got to the place in the Megillah where it says Haman, Amar Arur Haman the Arurim Banav. Cursed be Haman and his children. The Kaim Mashin Amar V'Shem Rashem Yerkav. Amar Rabbi Pinchas Ḥarbonah Zachor Latov. Rabbi Pinchas says when you get to Ḥarbonah, you have to say Zachor Latov. This is the Midrash Rabbah, Bereshit Rabbah. There is another Rashi on Esther Rabbah, as well as Bereshit Rabbah, where there's a quote where it quotes the same thing, but it said instead of just this being abbreviated, it says the same formula. Ki hava matei le Ḥarbonah. When it gets to Ḥarbonah's name in the Megillah, you say Zachor Latov. So now we understand something a little different than we had before. And this is the basis of the Yerushalmi, and this is the basis of the Halacha, and this is the basis of why we say that liturgical formula following the Megillah. But originally, back in the days of the Mishnah, these Tanaim, when they got to the place in the Megillah where they mentioned these people's names, they would say, Zachor Latov. That is our custom. Now, we are not unique. They're not everybody does this, but we're not the only ones to do it. So I think now we understand it a little better. But I found, I make it sound like I have great knowledge. It was quoted in another book, but I found among the Minhagim of Algeria that they have interesting customs. Some of them match what we do, and some are more. So this is the custom of Algeria, brought from a book called Zeh HaShulchan. Nahagul amar psukim elu bekol ram. Dahainu, what verses do the congregation say out loud? Ish Yehudi, that's what we do. And 2 letters where it says Dod Mordechai. 2 words, Dod Mordechai. That's when it's talking about Esther. It's interesting that those words are chosen. Don't know why. V'gam shtei tevot revach v'hatzala. That the congregation would say those words. Gam he tevot, and also 5 words, not the whole verse, but 5 words. Balayla hahu nadada shenat hamelech. That's what we do, the whole verse. They say the beginning of that verse. Gam dala tevot im mizera Yehudi Mordechai. That's towards the end of the Megillah, or with Haman actually. They say these 4 words. Gam shtei psukim u'Mordechai yatsa, and la Yehudim hayta ora. That's like what we do. That's the other verses we do. The gam pasuk acharon ki Mordechai, also what we do. And then it closes. Ukesha amar hashliach tzibor vayomer Ḥarbonah onin hakaal zachor latov. Add these 2 words, which are not in the Megillah at all. That's why it's separately. All the other things are verses or parts of verses from the Megillah. And here, you add these 2 words in, even though they're not actually in the Megillah. Zachor Latov. So I'm going to close there. I have other things to show you, but I think I don't have time. So it's after 9. So we're going to close it up here. But I hope that what you will take away from this presentation is that there are a lot of halachot which talk about not interrupting in the middle of the Megillah. And that is the standard halacha. But what's strange is that halacha is also what they call, lichatchila. Really, you shouldn't make any kind of interruption. But b'diavad, you could read the whole Megillah and be yotze in pieces, as long as you do it according to the way the halacha is. We don't need to go into, but you don't have to read it all at once, even though that's preferred. And with that being said, since now we know that you could interrupt certain things, especially if it's with the inyan of the Megillah, there is another halacha that we read from the Midrash that when you, zecher tzadik levracha, and also Rishaim have to be mentioned for the Genai or for the Arurim. And so when you get to Haman, there was a custom to say Arur Haman, Arur Banav, and there was a custom to say Gam Ḥarbonah Zachor L'Tov, even though those words are not in the Megillah. And the only remnant of the first custom to say Arur Haman inside the Megillah is an ancient custom itself, which is to use a grogger, to make noise. They don't say the verses anymore from Mishlei. We don't say Arur in the middle of the psukim anymore. But apparently they did in the times of Midrash. But we don't here at Sharet Israel, but widespread custom is to make noise. For the same reason, to that you have to curse him or eliminate his name. And this same halacha, though, by the same token, is when you get to Ḥarbonah, you have to Zachor L'Tov. That's where we end. That's the source. Interesting halachic connection to our minhag, and that's where I'm going to leave you. I'm going to let everyone talk. How do I get that again? Okay, and we can stop the recording. Let's see how to do that.